All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're peeling back the curtain on modern magic, but you're going to want to forget everything you think you know from the movies. Our guide for this is practical, no nonsense, and, well, brutally honest.
Yeah, that pretty much sets the tone, doesn't it? That little piece of advice comes from our guide on this journey, a chatty, chain-smoking, and fiercely pragmatic sorceress named Aunt Klara. She doesn't pull any punches, and her whole philosophy is simple. Magic is about doing, not sitting around and despairing.
So, here's the roadmap for our little journey today. First, we're going to meet our very unconventional mentor. Then, we'll talk about your first actual magical steps. After that, we'll get under the hood and really look at the mechanics of how this stuff works. From there, we'll get into the dangerous stuff, debunk a few myths, and finally, land on a pretty surprising truth at the end.
Okay, so first things first, who exactly is this person leading us through this strange and fascinating world? So our guide, Aunt Klara, is actually the alter ego of a figure named Frater U, who's a really big deal in what's called pragmatic magic. The best way to think of her is like decades of real-world experience all distilled down into this one cynical, coffee-drinking sorceress. She's here to cut through all the fluff and give us the kinds of answers you're just not going to find in some dusty old book.
So, this blunt philosophy is great and all, but how does that actually translate into practical advice? If you're fascinated by magic, but you feel kind of stuck on the sidelines, where do you even begin? Well, Aunt Clara's core message couldn't be more direct. Look, no master, no guru, nobody is going to do the work for you. Magic isn't a spectator sport. It demands that you get your hands dirty, take some risks, and learn by, trial and error. The only real mistake is to just not start at all. And this brings up a super common question. Should you join a magical group? Clara's advice on this is kind of a yes and no. See, a lot of orders are just esoteric social clubs, and the disappointment there can be huge. But a good order, she says, offers contact with its force field, a kind of shared energy that can really guide your progress. The trick is trusting your gut to tell the difference. Okay, so let's say you've decided to practice. You're doing the work. But what are you, actually doing? How does magic work on a mechanical level? Believe it or not, the core formula for magic is said to be stunningly simple and universal. It's just three things. First, you need will, your focused, raw desire. Second, you need imagination, the ability to vividly see the outcome in your mind's eye. And third, you need a trance state, any altered state of consciousness that lets you bypass your own inner critic. That's it. That's the engine that drives every spell, from the Amazon rainforest to ancient Europe. So what's with all the dramatic stuff? The robes, the candles, the rituals? Well, they aren't for the gods, they're for you. Klara calls it psychological PR work for your subconscious. You have to think of your subconscious like a small child. It doesn't really get subtle hints. It loves bold colors, high drama, and a bit of pomp. A ritual is just you putting on a little performance to communicate your desire to the part of your mind that actually makes things happen. This psychological approach is actually part of a bigger evolution in how people understand magic. The oldest way of thinking is the spirit model, where the magician is a go-between for the spirit world. Then you get the energy model, working with subtle forces. After that came this psychological model we're talking about. And today, the newest idea is the cyber magic model, which sees magic as directing pure information. It's faster, more abstract, and a whole new ballgame.
All right, let's get into the topics that, let's be honest, everyone is morbidly curious about. Demons, death spells, and the real dangers of the craft.
So, the eternal question, are demons real? You've got two basic schools of thought. The animist view says they're just projections from our own psyche. The spiritist view says, nope, they're real, independent beings. So which one is correct? The pragmatic answer is, it doesn't matter. The key is to shift your belief depending on what you need. In daily life, treat demons as projections to stay sane. But during a ritual, you treat them as 100% real to get results. Now, just to be crystal clear, this is not a how-to. This is an explanation of a complex theory. A death spell is apparently incredibly difficult to pull off because it has to fight the target's most powerful defense, their own instinct to survive. The attack is almost always aimed at the immune system so that something else can do the final job. And one of the biggest myths out there is that this kind of magic automatically bounces back at you. The pragmatic view is that there's no cosmic karma police. If you don't want blowback, you have to actively build your own protections.
Speaking of myths, that brings us to the mountain of misconceptions about magic. A lot of them fueled by pop culture and, frankly, by some of the grand claims that magical groups make themselves.
You see it all the time. Magical orders claiming they have ancient lineages going back to Atlantis or ancient Egypt. Well, from a regular historical point of view, most of that is, in Klara's words, complete rubbish. But here's the twist. There's a difference between historical truth and mythological truth. A story doesn't have to be factually accurate to be magically useful. Believing you're part of some ancient, powerful tradition can be an incredibly potent psychological tool.
And of course, we have to talk about Harry Potter. Is any of that real magic? The short answer from this perspective is no. It's viewed as brilliant literature, a fantastic story that expertly weaves together classic myths and the tropes of a British boarding school novel. It's a totally compelling, self-contained fictional world, but it has very little to do with the actual practice of magic.
And this really gets to the core of the critique. A world with a ministry of magic and endless bureaucracy? For a real magician, the whole goal is to transcend those kinds of limitations, not just recreate them with wands. It's the exact opposite of what a true practitioner is actually trying to achieve. So, after we've stripped away the myths, the drama, and all the rigid dogma, what are we left with? What is the core philosophy of a modern, pragmatic magician?
This is it. This is the ultimate pragmatic truth. Effectiveness is the only thing that really matters. Is a belief useful? Does a certain technique get you results? If the answer is yes, then for your purposes, it's true. This whole approach frees the magician from getting stuck in rigid systems, letting them use whatever works from any tradition without getting bogged down in arguments about what's absolute or what's real.
Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought. If magic is all about shaping reality, and even the past is just more raw material to work with, then the stories we tell ourselves about our world, our traditions, even our own origins, they stop being just stories. They become tools. So the question isn't what is true. The real question is, what truth will you choose to create?